Welcome to 33 Tangents, a podcast discussing a wide variety of topics from digital analytics to working remotely to current happenings in business and technology. Your hosts, Jason Thompson, John Narang, and myself, Jim Driscoll, all live in different areas of the world, but work together in the same company. Our regular day-to-day conversations often go off in various directions, and the goal of this podcast is to share our ideas and find new ways to engage with others. So I was just asking, how long are you in Bali for?
Just a few more days. This weekend. I'm going back to Thailand.
Okay, cool.
So it was 2 weeks in total.
Nice. What's going on, Jason?
Trying to get some coffee into me.
Jason, I was telling Jim before you joined. It's funny because I'm in the co-working space now, and there's it's 10 o'clock at night here, and it's exceedingly busy. It was kind of amusing to me because I'm usually working kind of alone at night, and like it's just everyone on phone calls and all in different languages. It's kind of cool.
It's crazy. So people are like actively working or hanging out or collaborate? What's going on?
Oops. Sorry, you cut out.
I was just saying, so people are actively working or kind of hanging out, collaborating?
Oh, no, the people that are here now are all actively working.
Interesting. I wonder if they're working for like companies more Western based, and so they're aligning their time like you, or it's just
the people
different time shifts.
The people that are now, not necessarily in America, but a lot of Europe. There's a lot of different languages going on, but I'm guessing it's not coming over my mic.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's very motivating. We're not alone.
No, we're not. I get hit up a lot. I think, we did a few content pieces, and it seems to be like a magnet for people talking remote, wanting to work remote, having products to support remote. So there's definitely a larger community there than I realized.
Yeah, actually, since we're on a podcast, I would love to plug the place I'm at, the co-working space in Ubud, Bali, called Ubud. Hub in Ubud is what it stands for, but it's just like one of the, by far, I would say probably the best co-working space I've ever been to. Just such a community is built around it, and they really kind of know how to run it. They just passed their 5 years in service, and it was the first co-working space in Bali, and kind of was one of the ones that really kickstarted the whole digital nomad movement. So they really focus on that, and they have. It's interesting because a lot of the co-working places I've been to before have catered a lot to. It's like some travelers, but it's usually more local freelancers. Whereas here, because of the location, it's almost 100% people that are just constantly traveling, like the real nomadic type people. So because that, they have like a lot of services and events really geared towards getting people like onboarded into the community, onboarded into the city, the culture, everything. So it's been quite a treat to be out here.
That's great. Man, 5 years, that's a pretty good run. I've always had a lot of interest in the whole co-working thing, and I just don't know enough about it to know how it works. The numbers seem really hard to make it work, especially if you're going to do it right and offer a lot of services. But it sounds like they've found a way to make it work and at least be sustainable.
Yeah, no, I could definitely talk to you a whole nother hour on all the stuff they're doing with the community. It's really fascinating.
Awesome. Yeah, we should have that conversation later.
All right. So, and I think John being in a co-working space in Bali kind of is a good segue, or it's a good preface to what I'd like to talk about today. And they're two different things, but they're related in the fact that they take a good amount of discipline to manage. And these are things that I see many of those that are classified as information workers have to deal with. The first is the concept of being always on. And to be honest with you, this is nothing new. This is something that's been around for at a minimum 15 years, if not more. Um, it's the concept of you're always accessible, or at least people assume you're always accessible via your phone or email or a messaging platform such as Slack. And it's kind of funny because when I describe what I do for work to people and then I work from a home office, the response I usually get from them is, I couldn't do that. I don't have the discipline to focus on my work. Everything else would take away from me being able to do my work. And in response to that, I usually come back and say, well, for me, the problem is not being able to not focus on work, but it's the ability to shut down at the end of the day. When the day is over, turning off the laptop and actually shutting down email, shutting down Slack and walking away from it, and also shutting down my mind and not thinking about, okay, I'll tackle this tomorrow when I got that, or, oh, I just have this great idea. Let me just jump back in and finish this. I'm definitely one that falls into the trap of being always on. The second piece is distractions, and distractions can take multiple forms. It could be the latest email that comes into your inbox while you're working on something else. Or if you're working from a home office, it's the pile of laundry upstairs and you're thinking, well, I could just take a couple minutes and, get that in the wash. Whatever it is, distractions, are all over the place. And just with, the ability to shut down at the end of the day, the ability to manage those distractions. And in fact, a distraction could be trying to record a podcast while 3 or 4 other people are taking phone calls in the same space that you're in. And keeping the discipline to focus on what you're working on and not just jump at the most recent shiny object that's come into view. So that was a lot of information to start with, but some really good stuff for us to dissect over the next 35, 40 minutes. So who'd like to kick us off?
So I'll start with the always on because I think that I have an interesting experience of the polar extremes. And I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but I very clearly remember the year was 1999. And I remember my boss saying to me, "Hey, the company wants to buy you and pay for a cell phone." And I'm like, "Nope, nope, I'm not interested. I don't want to be contacted. I don't want you to be able to reach me whenever, when I'm here, I'm here. When I'm gone, I'm gone." And so when I started out my career, I was very much on the opposite side where I rejected any possible thing that would make it easier for me to be always on. And I rejected that for a long time. But now I think I'm to the extreme opposite where I don't know that I have good feedback or things to offer as far as not being always on, because I think it's something that I kind of suffer from where I'm in that always on mentality. I can be laying down, relaxing, just trying to watch something on TV, clear my mind. I've got my phone right next to me and I'm checking it and an email comes through and I'm like, oh, I got to run back in the office and jump on that and look at that. And so, that's something that is a real struggle for me, is that concept of just always being on. I know John has some probably good ideas on how to shut down from that, and it's something that I very much need to work on. So it's interesting for me, kind of just taking a step back and over my career, watching me go from one extreme to another, and would really love to find that middle ground
Yeah,
somewhere.
I definitely used to be the person that was always on all the time, but I will say nowadays I'm definitely not always on. But that said, in terms of tips, I feel like I'm cheating a little bit because I have the time zone disparity usually that helps me. Um, I think what's different is that, Jim, you mentioned before that you need to be conscious to try to get off at the end of your day. But for me, it's the opposite. I try to be free of notifications and that kind of thing at the beginning of my day or during my day. Luckily, it's the noise is usually pretty light because it's when you guys are all sleeping. But occasionally I will wake up to notification or something, or some kind of message that might have happened when I was sleeping, and it honestly kind of screws up my entire day when that happens. Like, it just stresses me out. And then, so if it's something that seems urgent, it's even worse, because it's like, even if I responded quickly, it's almost too late for that day. But luckily, that kind of thing happens pretty minimally. I will say, though, that I think it's important to definitely, I mean, just tactically, like using do not disturb kind of configurations on your phone and that kind of thing. We use Slack a lot, which I think a lot of other people do for most communication. Uh, and fortunately, there's the features to kind of turn things off after a certain time. In my case, I usually turn it off after 2 a.m. or 2:30 a.m. Based on my schedule. But I think that definitely is important to kind of set those boundaries, whatever they are, and not and realizing most things really don't need to be you don't need to be notified in real time. I think I also have, there's ways to contact me at any time, of course. I think, like all of us, and I think the other aspect of it is really just the trust that someone internally or externally with our clients too won't just be tagging us or notifying us unless something really is urgent, needs to be immediately responded to. I think it's important to make the distinction of what really is urgent versus what really isn't. Like, everything can't be very high priority.
I think that's a great point. And I think it's something that as remote workers, we're probably a little sensitive to and probably make things more of an emergency or more of an immediate response than they need to. So I think part of that is simply because we've been brought up in this system where there is kind of lack of trust, just in general, where the overall kind of market is saying, how can you do work at home? If I was at home, I think the Jim kind of kicked off the topic by saying, if I was at home, I would, be doing a million other things other than work. There's endless numbers of articles out there that basically say that, right? That companies are saying, hey, we can't have our employees working remotely because they actually wouldn't be doing work. And I think that's had the opposite effect on us, where we've gone out of our way to show that we're more responsive than our colleagues in the office. And I think that has kind of shifted too far to the extreme where we feel like we have to be always on and everything is an emergency that needs to be responded to now. And for most businesses, the business that we do, the stuff that we do with our clients, very little of what we do is an emergency. A lot of it is forward thinking, and we really sit down and plan it out. So there's really no need, unless there's something very catastrophic happening, for us to get into that firefighter mentality and look at things as extreme emergencies. But again, I think we've kind of trained ourselves to thinking that way because we've been a bit defensive, because the outside world has told us, you can't operate like an employee in an office when you're at home. And so we've kind of gone to the extreme to say, oh yes, we can.
A lot of people always ask me, or just assume, like, oh, you must work a lot of hours. And my response actually is, I don't even really know how many hours I usually work. I don't know if that's the case with you guys as well, but I feel like in many cases, since we're, I mean, one, not tracking hours, but two, also not necessarily chained to a desk, for a finite amount of time. Like, it's kind of flowing in and out of work throughout the day and night, that I never really bother to really think about exactly how many hours it is. I don't know if you're the same way, or you try to look at that.
No, yeah, absolutely the same way. And that's probably part to do with our business. So we're in services, and we've kind of rejected the billable hour model, and we don't do timesheets, and so we don't really have a structure to record how much time we're working. But just overall, you're right. I don't really have a good sense of what it is, and people have asked me as well, and I'm like, I honestly don't know, because for me, even where we're more aligned here from a time zone perspective, and we don't have kind of that luxury that you do, John, where we can shift the schedule to that extreme all the time. But still, it's shifted. It's, I don't think any one of us comes in and sits down at 8, 9 in the morning, and then
Mm-hmm.
gets up and leaves at 5 at night. It just doesn't work that way. And so there's lots of smaller pieces of work happening and things happening in between. And yeah, I don't have a good sense of what that total time is.
I will say the luxury of doing that also comes with a lot of costs as well, obviously. Like, I have no nights to myself.
But you have days all to yourself where you're not bothered.
That's true.
Jim, what are your thoughts?
There was a bunch of stuff in there. I was trying to scribble down notes so I could respond to a few things there. But yeah, I think there's some very specific actions that John alluded to that I do every day. And for full disclosure, I mean, both of these items are work in progress things for me and have been for a little while. The first thing I do when I come in the morning is I turn off all notifications on my computer. So this way I come in, I know what my plan is for the day. And one of the things I've been trying to get into a habit of is checking email, responding to email right away, and then closing it out. So then I can move forward with the items I'm looking forward to tackling during the day. Those are the first couple things. And then as far as shutting down, because I think this is probably my biggest problem I've been trying to work on is I can keep going. Especially I'm the type of person when I get into something, I want to keep going. I don't want to stop because I know I'm not going to be able to pick up with it later. So, the evening will come around and it's just like, I don't want to stop because I want to finish what I have on my plate. But then the problem is it goes a step further and it's like, oh, there's just this one more thing. Then there's just one more thing after that. So what I've been trying to do to make sure that I actually kind of shut down at the end of the day and have time just to relax and clear my head and come back fresh the next day is actually have stuff to do at night that's not work related. Whether it's just something as simple of, instead of cutting the grass at 10 a.m. on a Saturday, cut it in the evening. So it's like, okay, I have something else to go do. And that for me, yard work, believe it or not, is kind of like one of those like Zen things that actually helps decompress. So like little tricks there.
How do your neighbors feel about that?
Well, I mean, I'm not cutting it at 9 o'clock at night. We're cutting it about like 6:30. I haven't gotten any complaints yet. No, it's like, talk about like, oh, yeah, we don't come in at 9 and sign off at 5, but like when 6 o'clock rolls around, start wrapping things up and then have other things to do. So that I'm not just sitting there with the laptop. I noticed this was a real problem several months ago when, my wife and I, we'd finish up dinner, we'd sit on the couch and turn on the TV. Next thing you know, I'm popping up the laptop and responding to emails at 8:30 at night, or, oh, I just have this one last thing to do for this one client and doing that at 9 o'clock at night. And that started to become a little unhealthy.
Yeah. I think you hit on an important topic that we could probably spend a little bit of time discussing. And I don't know if we've discussed this on other episodes where we were talking about our remote setups, but I think it's maybe worth revisiting. And that is, what can we do within our setup to avoid distractions? And you hit on an important point, and I think you said something about, I come in and I turn off notifications. So I didn't really set out to create a sterile environment to work in, but I've kind of been evaluating what times I feel the most productive and what times I don't. And I've kind of made a mental note of what my setup looks like. And for me, the notifications were hugely distracting. So when I feel the most when I feel the most focused and I'm doing my best work, the common themes are, I make sure that my notifications are muted. So, oh, a tweet came in, I need to go check out what so and so is talking about. Or, oh, I see a 1 or a 2 in my inbox, I better go see what those emails are. Or, I got a notification popped up in Facebook. It's amazing, that one notification, even if you don't go click on it, the fact that you notice it and start thinking about it, I wonder who emailed me, or I wonder what that update is. You've all of a sudden lost that continuity, and even though you didn't fully context switch, you have to an extent. It's going to take you some time to get back to where you were. And so that simple act of just hiding those notifications was extremely helpful to me. And so what I've started doing is, when there's a project that I really want to get deep into, I'll start like a new browser session and just open up a new browser window. I'll close down all of my other tabs or minimize them that have any alerts. I'll shut off my alerts, and I'll, maximize my screen and just say, okay, I'm going to just focus in on this. One of the other things that I've done is I've been using Workflowy to make lists. And I've come in every morning and said, okay, today I'm going to make a list of the 3 to 5 things that I want to be my focus. And I've tried to hold myself accountable to that list. And so if something comes in, then I force myself to evaluate it and say, okay, what am I going to take off this list in place of the new thing that I want to come in? And that's been really helpful for me to maintain focus. And I know there's lots of other tools out there that can help do that, but for me, the act of saying, I'm not just going to continue to add items to my to-do list for today. I'm going to tell myself this is the set thing list of things I want to do, and if I'm going to bump one off, I have to forcefully think through which one am I going to deprioritize to put a new thing in. And that's really helped to keep me focused as well.
Yeah, I think removing the notifications, like you mentioned, is absolutely key. I used to use a separate. Well, we use, like many companies use, Gmail as our email. But for a while I was using an email client, Airmail, which I think is a great client. But the problem was I was getting notified of emails as they were coming in. So now I just went back to the old school, using doing it Gmail in the browser, and I just honestly don't even have my email open during the day. And I think sometimes I might forget to read my email, actually, because I think, at least for me, I would say over 90% of the communication, maybe even 95%, is Slack, which is great for managing notifications. Email is usually the loophole, but I think I've just kind of forced myself to not look at it that often. I don't know if that's good to say or not, but it's the truth. I'm phasing it out.
No, it brings up a couple things. So yeah, I use a separate email client as well, for that exact fact, because it's something I can actually close out, because I do like having the actual, like, email program, but I try to close that out. But I think, focusing on email, because this seems to be a common thread through our conversation right now, is email. So I know I've worked with this kind of person in the past. I bet both of you have, and many have, where person sends an email, and again, email has gotten this, like, there's this, or not so much email has gotten it, it's people that use it. There's this assumption that when you send an email, someone is going to immediately reply, that someone is managing their day via email. Email is the one thing that's up, so as an email comes in, they respond back. I've worked with a few people in the past, actually, where they would send an email, and if you didn't reply within a few minutes, they were hitting you up on some kind of instant messaging platform, because before Slack, a lot of us were using Skype. So the Skype message would come in, and if you didn't respond to the Skype message, a phone call came in. So it created this atmosphere of, I need to make sure I respond to this person quickly, so that they don't start bothering me in other ways. And one of the things I've done with most people, I've helped set expectations on what is absolutely urgent. What defines urgency, and it's not so much me dictating, but it's working with those people, whether it's folks internally or with clients. It's this collaborative discussion I try to bring up early on, and in defining, let's define what is truly urgent. So that, because one problem is when everything's urgent, nothing is urgent. But if you don't have that firm determination on what is urgent, everything gets in the way, and you're just dealing with the latest thing that's come up, and you're not moving the bigger things. So in that vein, a lot of those folks know that, like, I'm not going to respond to an email very, very quickly. Now, if 2 or 3 days goes by and you haven't heard from me, hey, definitely send that follow-up email. Hey, just bumping this to the top of your inbox, kind of thing. You may have forgotten it, because chances are it just got it just got missed. But most times they know if there is something that is truly urgent, something that needs to be looked at immediately. And these are along the lines of data is missing, something is preventing certain conversions from happening on the site, like those kinds of level of problems. They're going to message me via Slack, and they're going to say, "Hey, this is what we're seeing. Is this something you could take a look at? In fairly short order." So that's also some of the actions, not necessarily around the technology that we use, but the expectation setting and making the others feel a collaborative part of it, because then that's where you're going to get buy-in, and it's going to help lessen that expectation of others that you're going to respond quickly, and hence that you're when you're trying not to be distracted by that latest email that comes in, the latest shiny object to catch your
So
attention.
let's take a quick tangent on that, because that I think there's a couple pieces of that. One, I damn it, I hate that I say as a filler. I need to figure out how to cut that out. Okay. So I get very irritated when people don't reply to my emails. So maybe I'm part of the problem. My expectation is that if I email someone, that I hear back within 24 hours. So I expect to hear back the next day. So not necessarily immediately, but I expect to hear back fairly quickly. And I'm not expecting an answer, but I'm expecting a, hey, I received your communication. This is what it looks like. I'll be able to get back to you X. Otherwise, I feel it's like it's in a black hole. Did they see it? Are they looking at it? What is an appropriate time to expect some kind of feedback? So maybe I have a misset expectation that 24 hours is realistic. Maybe it's longer than that. So that's number one. And then number two, as someone working remotely, how do we proactively help set that? So if we're working with a client or a vendor or even internally, is it something that we should be a little bit more forceful as far as stating, hey, this is how I operate? When you email, here's kind of how I work, and you should expect to hear back X, and this is how it works. Is it important to set that expectation up front, or does that something that just happens organically, and then over time people just accept a certain way of how that works?
I don't know if this is the politically correct answer, but I actually try to never set the precedent to reply to email really quickly. That seems to work. Is that bad?
No, I mean that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out what the right set is. So you're saying it's less of you kind of saying this is how it operates, and you've just kind of put yourself in a certain um, way of operating, and it sets the precedent on its own, and you've kind of kept yourself to that, and it sets the expectations fairly
Right.
reasonably with the people that you work
I
with.
mean, that said, though, I think it works in our case because we do have that other medium of that open line of communication, which is Slack. Like, with all of our clients, we're lucky enough to have like a Slack, channel or team set up to kind of communicate directly. And I think when we push that as more of the primary channel, then I mean that's organically what happens. And for most of my work, I would say email is really more for deliverables and not really active threads. But maybe I'm just fortunate with the work that I've been a part of. Do you actually have active work threads in email outside of Slack or other
I do.
mediums?
I do. So a lot of the work that I do is uh, pre-client work. So
Mm,
a lot of
fair.
sales work, a lot of work with our partners, uh, people that I don't have direct access to through a Slack channel. So yeah, I think for me, a lot of my communications still go through email.
Should have a pre-sales Slack channel. Just kidding. Just kidding.
That would be interesting.
That'd be an experiment.
That would be something.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely still have, some situations where active conversations are held via email. Some it's just some organizations that just haven't adopted Slack, whether it's been an organizational dictate or just that, the members within there are a bit more old school and want to use email. Um, uh, I think John does have a point. I think when you prove that you get results, because I think to use an old sports adage, winning cures everything. When it comes to work, getting results is ultimately what matters in most cases, or at least the people that we want to work with. Getting results is what matters. And I think as you prove that, say, okay, I may not respond in 10 minutes to an email, but I'm still going to get things done. There's less expectation that they're going to get things are going to be responded to. But I think there is also a bit of the conversation to be had as you build rapport with clients, with internal folks, with people in general. As you build rapport, you don't necessarily come in heavy-handed and say, this is the way I operate, but you subtly set the expectation. And it may just be, say you're using a combination of email and Slack. There might be side conversations. I've done this with clients saying, hey, saw this come in, tackling X, we'll jump on Y when that comes in. And they're good, as long as they've received some kind of acknowledgement. And taking those steps there, helps set the expectation that, okay, I'm not always going to respond to the email and I'm not going to answer your question right away, but it's been seen, it's on a list of things to do. So this way we can continue to execute on the bigger things that we're trying to do. Um, for us, we want to work on the more strategic things with clients. And those are the things that take time to do. They're not tasks that are completed in 15 minutes, 30 minutes. These are things that may take hours to even a couple of days or even longer, depending upon what's involved. But the cycle of, you know, say, meeting with them, preparing something, and then revving through multiple iterations of it, that takes time. And I think as you work with them and going back to the rapport building, because I think, at the core of all of this is, a level of rapport with others. As you build rapport, they're going to see that, okay, these bigger things are what we really want to focus on, and these little things will be taken care of, in due time.
Yeah, agreed. So can we quickly go back to the always on, because I think we've arrived at an interesting intersection, and John forced me to think about it as he asked, well, what kind of conversations are you having through email? So one of the biggest challenges that I have working on the sales side is working with companies that one of their primary objections is the remote aspect. How can you do this work if you're not sitting in our offices? How can we guarantee that you're going to do good work if we can't see you doing the work? It's that old adage that we've been fighting for a long time, but it's very real. We typically see this in larger, more established companies that this is the thought process. But I would say 70% of the prospects that I talk to, it's an objection that I have to deal with and have to help alleviate their fears that we can do good work remotely and we can be very efficient and we can do it just as well sitting in your office as sitting in a co-working location in Bali. However, how do we then align that with the way that we work? So I think John brought up a good point. It's like, look, we're going to set the precedent as, we're not going to jump on everything. And to an extreme, that's kind of the opposite of what the fears are of these people and these companies that I'm talking to. So one, I think it's probably representative of where our brand sits in the market. I obviously within a small group of companies that have worked with us or heard about us, that fear isn't there because we've proofed it out through execution and delivery. But in the larger marketplace, there isn't a globally accepted, 33 sticks, they deliver and they work remotely, it just works. And so we have to alleviate that fear that if I can't see you working, you're probably not working. So as I try to balance those conversations on the sales side, how do we alleviate their fears? In the long run, I think we are very effective doing that because as John or Jim pointed out, it's through delivery and through actually doing the work and delivering high value services. But up front, how do we alleviate that fear? Is it setting expectations? how do we handle that? Each of you have taken on clients that have maybe had differing degrees of anxiety around working remotely. Is it something that you've addressed up front? Is it something you've just had a comfort level with, saying, I know it's going to be a little uneasy for the first couple weeks or months until they get it, but once it clicks, it's going to click? I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
My thoughts, I don't know if I can directly respond to everything you just brought up, but I feel like it all evens out in a way. Like, even though technically, there might be a little bit more of a lag because we are remote. I mean, I don't think it's been anything that's ever been detrimental. And, in the long run, I think we're actually more efficient than most people they have sitting within the office because we don't have a lot of other office distractions in the way. And I know that was kind of the second part of what Jim wanted to bring up as well. There are certain distractions that come with working remotely, but there's also a lot less, I feel like, where we're able to produce more, even though there might be an increased latency. Does that make sense? It made sense in my head.
I, it, and
Yeah.
that's the most important place for it to make sense. I absolutely agree, and that's why my comfort level is on a long enough time scale. I have
Hmm.
zero concerns because I've seen what we can do from an execution perspective, and it's what I talk about when I'm addressing the larger marketplace or individual prospects. I'm like, look, these guys deliver, and I've seen it for years and years and years, and they're going to deliver at a higher level than most employees sitting in an office. And that's not to say that it should be necessarily compared, because it's different. We're not full-time employees. We're brought in to work on very specific strategic things for our clients. But when we're doing that work, it's highly focused, even though we've talked about all these different distractions and things that we have to deal with. Overall, it's highly focused, highly efficient, and we're able to produce a high value in a shorter period of time. So I have no fears of that once it's engaged. It's that upfront piece. So it's before we engage and it's right after we engage. That's the uneasy part for me, because I know that so many people and so many companies just have this deep fear that if I can't see you working, I just don't know how I can manage
We
that.
should send them one of the many books or studies on this subject.
Indeed, there's a lot of good stuff out there, but I think until they've been able to experience it firsthand, it's just theory,
Fair.
right? I think they have to have that experience for it to
It is a
start to.
challenge.
It is.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail right on the head there. It's they actually have to experience it. So going back to your initial question there of, how did we handle that with, say, clients that were a little skittish about this whole setup coming in? It's, I found that, it helps to be sensitive to that, in the beginning, and help move them along. But at the same time, as you're being sensitive to it, don't fall into the trap of that, you need to constantly prove that, I'm working, whether it's, responding to an email right away, or, any of those kinds of actions, because I think as they experience it and as you provide results, because again, I think results being the ultimate thing, where if you're able to provide results, then after a while they start to realize it doesn't matter if you're here or not. It doesn't matter if I can't see you or not. It doesn't matter if we're in the same time zone or not. I'm still getting what I need, and we're good.
Agreed. Agreed. So I want to quickly go back to the distractions, and then I think we should talk about how we're maybe go back to the always on, because I think that's an important piece to make sure we don't gloss over. But I just wanted to also throw out there that one of the other changes that I made, it's very, very subtle, but I think had a huge impact on how I work. And this is so I'm on a Mac, so this may not affect how other OSs work, but I, for years and years and years, just always had my dock up. And the minute I put my dock on auto hide, so I didn't see like that my tweet bot had 76 unread messages or my iMessenger had 5 messages, that was life changing. So super simple to hide that, but it had a huge impact because I was every time I saw a little number, like I don't know what it is, human nature, like I had to clear that out. I don't want that saying that I have any notifications. And so, kind of sterilizing that was a huge step for me.
I actually think it's a common thing for people in the data industry, especially from the technical side, like yourself, to want to see everything at all the time. All the data, all the right in front of your eyes. But I think, yeah, like you said,
It's so hard.
it's that fact is very distracting,
It is, and I'm just looking.
and sometimes
I'm just looking.
you can't focus with
You
it.
can't, and I'm just looking at my setup right now. I brought up my browser, and I have two Gmail windows open up because I too use just the Gmail web app for work. I also have my personal Gmail up. I have Facebook up. I have LinkedIn up, and then down in my dock, I have Slack, I have Skype, I have Tweetbot, I have my iMessenger. Um, it's just so much, and I can see how it just can become easily overwhelming just responding to every new alert that comes in.
And similarly, we've cleaned up many analytics dashboards that also had way too much data for the same reason and too much more simplified views.
Jim, put that down as a topic of conversation because I have many thoughts on that. It is, and not to go off on too big of a tangent, but it's kind of a sexy thing right now that you have these like overly produced dramatic deliverables and dashboards. I get it. It sells, people resonate with it, but I think we've kind of swung to a far extreme where it's like there's so much noise that it's like I just want to go back to simple. I I love my Jeep for that
No,
reason. My car dashboard is so super simple. I'm like, this is
well,
refreshing.
my putting on my work hat, my view is my blunt work hat is that people that want to see all the data at the time really don't know what they're looking for. There's no strategy behind it. So that's what we. That's,
No, there's no strategy, but if you can make a lot of noise and have a lot of flashing lights, it doesn't really matter because you're entertaining and people won't question that you don't know what you're looking for.
correct.
And there's a similar thing that happens when you're building out an implementation and then maturing it. It's the whole idea of tagging everything that is taggable, and creating all of this noise. And it's almost like the metric is not that we're gathering valuable information. It's that we've tagged all of these things. We've tagged all the things, and we're collecting all this data. But most of it is just noise and not usable. And people will use it at first and be like, oh, this is great, and then just stop using it after a while. And that was, effort that was spent on something that really just provides no value.
Look how we're seamlessly moving between abstract
See,
topics and direct work
it, it,
deliverables.
it's awesome. See, this is why the podcast is named Tangents, because when the three of us get together and talk, we could start off somewhere and end up a completely different direction. There's so many tangents we take. So now you see why the podcast is named 33 Tangents. So getting back to distractions, kind of getting distracted and going off on a tangent there. What do we recommend? For me, I think it really is a very personal choice. I don't know if it's something that you can really prescribe for every employee in your company, that you give them a setup and say, hey, here's your setup to be most productive. I think you can definitely give ideas, you can definitely give things that they can work with, but it sounds like it's really highly personable.
For the wait, are we talking about the always being on or the distractions?
Yeah, well, just both, because our setups are so different, right? For me, it was important to have a dedicated place in my house that is just my work office. It's not for
Mm-hmm.
side projects. It's not for storage. It's like one room that all it is this is 33 sticks work. That's not, everybody can't do that. For John, that's not feasible because you're more nomadic, but for me that works. For me, one of the things that I did that was very helpful is I invested in a really good pair of headphones, and for me putting that on and kind of escaping either silence or into some background music, is super helpful for blocking out any kind of distractions, and that's probably could be said for an office as well. But for me, that works. But I don't know if that works for everybody. So how can we help people, whether they're in an office or working remotely, to come up with their ideal setup for not being on all the time, for avoiding distractions? And again, for me, I think it's a personal thing. I don't know if we can come up with a universal here's how it works, but maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, I think those are two completely different things, though, the always on and the distractions. Like for always on, I think we did come to a bit of consensus, which was really to manage your notifications in whatever form those are to some degree. I think we all agree that it's important to not be on 100% of the time.
So yeah, I agree. Agree. So managing notifications, setting expectation on response time. So I think those can be some universal truths that can be built in, and obviously that's going to differ from business to business. Each business is different, and expectations are different. But setting those expectations up front, I think, can be something that is universally adopted. So I think
Yeah,
you're right.
but in terms of managing distractions, I think that I agree that that's also like very highly dependent on yourself, the individual. So I guess to whatever amount of flexibility that you have to experiment with it, whether it's headphones and listening to certain types of sounds or lack thereof, or different environments, or I think it is really hard to kind of make a universal recommendation there. I feel like.
So so maybe let's flip the script here and put the pressure on you and Jim from an employee standpoint, working for a company that is less structured, remote. What are your expectations of the company? So as you're going to work for a new company, what are your expectations as far as how do I operate in this environment? How am I going to be successful, either from a setup standpoint or from a communication standpoint around, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing from a work output standpoint? Does that make sense?
Are you talking about with like our clients?
No, I'm talking about coming to work at 33.6. So we've hired John. It may be a different environment than you worked in before. What is your expectation of the company starting to say, "Hey John, this is kind of how we work. We're remote and here's some things you should know." I think we've probably done it organically, but maybe it's something that needs a bit more thought, or for other companies that are working with remote employees from an employee perspective, what's the expectation as you onboard, as far as how can I be successful working remote? We've talked about all of our personal approaches, but do employees and should employees have expectations of the companies they go to work for to help maybe make them more successful, more comfortable in that environment?
In my case, when I started, I distinctly remember everyone saying that we have no expectations really of how you work, but just care about kind of the execution. And it was, but I think that, I mean, maybe it was lack of actually having an onboarding program at the time, but I think it allowed the flexibility to really experiment and kind of optimize what kind of execution, what style worked well with our clients or internally.
Fair
I,
enough.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think for me, it kind of came down to I'm trying to think back to when I first started, and I think throughout my career I look at things, and 33 Sticks is definitely the least structured company I've worked for. Other ones you come in, there's your desk is set up, there's a packet, there's this step by step stuff, for everything to do. Where coming in here, it was less that, and I think for me it was I need to figure out everyone's communication style, and figuring out, um, you know, and I'm stuttering here, but yeah, it comes back to just the communication style, and what to expect from everyone. Because yeah, like you don't like I didn't want it to be like, okay, I send out a message, I'm expecting an immediate response, because I know for me, that bothers me when people are like expecting an immediate response, especially if I'm in the middle of something. So it was like kind of coming in, trying to figure those things out without disrupting what was already in motion.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. So I think we've had some really good discussion during this episode. I don't know that we really solved anything per se, but I think hopefully we've given people a lot to think about. I think oftentimes just being forced to examine your setup and how you operate often can highlight some very small changes that can be made. But maybe let's wrap it up with going around and giving, I guess, our number one tip, both from a stay always connected perspective and from a distraction perspective that has helped us the most. John, do you want to start off with you on the spot?
Well, for me, the always on one is easy, and it's to not always be on. That's my main tip there. So to force yourself to be off. By I guess the other to expand on that a little bit, it's to kind of push all your communication as much as possible into systems that can be managed. So that's away from email for me, because that's kind of unmanageable. But Slack, things like that, you can manage when you get notified. In terms of distractions, it's really just, for me, that one is really just experimenting as much as possible to find uh, the right kind of setup that works for you, whether it's the time of day, if you have that luxury, um, the environment that you're in, the standing, sitting, all those things. I considered variables at the beginning and took a while to kind of figure out. But now I have like a really good picture in my mind what really works for me to kind of be more focused. But it is kind of it's a constant uh, challenge to learn that. It's a constantly evolving thing, I think, for me.
It is, yeah, for sure. For me, I would say from a distraction standpoint, the biggest thing for me is creating a clean environment. And so for me, that is when I know I want to work on a project that's going to take several hours, it's putting the phone away, it's closing browser tabs, it's putting do not disturb on. It's really important for me to not have any of those potential alerts. And it's not going to be completely sterile, but getting it as clean as possible for me has helped to focus the most. As far as the always on, I think I mentioned, I don't know that I'm in a position to give advice there because it's something that I really struggle with, but the biggest piece that is working for me is just setting expectations. So making sure up front, whether I'm working with a prospect on the sales side or whether I'm working with a client or one of our partners, setting expectations on when I will be getting back to them and what they should expect has helped the most as far as trying to be always on. From there, it's just a mental thing that I need to work on, and still, it's really difficult for me to put the phone away, to be disconnected. Again, I don't think many things that we do are actual emergencies that we have to do right now. So rewiring my brain to think that way is something that is something I need to fix, and it's something is a real struggle. So I don't really have great advice for unplugging there.
Yeah. So as far as unplugging and not being always on, as I've been trying to work to get into a good place with that, my thing would be is it's something that happens slowly over time. It's not something that it happens very quickly. It's a very slow creep, and it starts with, all right, I just finished up dinner. I have 5 minutes. Let me just check email, and then slowly, they get the laptop out, or let me jump on this one item. It's recognizing when you're going down that path. Um, you know. And anybody who falls into that classification of information worker, they don't have a strict 9 to 5, so they can easily get sucked into this, and it's recognizing when um, you're doing a little bit here and there turns into you're working at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, because you feel the need to. So I would say recognize when that slow creep starts to happen so that you can course correct before it it becomes a very bad habit to break, or very hard habit to break, rather. And as far as distractions go, I think there's definitely some small steps that you could take right away. Being, just turning off notifications on the computer. Yeah, they're a great little, feature to show off that, as part of an OS, just about every OS has that kind of feature, turning those off so that every little shiny object that comes in doesn't pull your attention away. I think I had mentioned previously that, it takes you about 15 minutes to get really focused on what you're doing. And just having that little notification come up that, there's a new email that will definitely take you away.
Awesome. This has been a great conversation, guys.
It's been a lot of fun.
I guess until next week.
Cool. We'll go ahead and wrap up for now, and we'll talk to everybody later.
I'm going to go lay in my hammock and disconnect for a while.
Nice. Enjoy.
Sounds good. While you were just talking about distractions, this lizard ran right across.
Nice.
I posted a photo on Slack, actually.
Awesome.
Nice.
Damn it, John.
I'm like, you're like, how do you not get distracted? I'm like, distracted instantly by a lizard. No, just kidding.
Oh, it blends right in with the wall. That's awesome.
It ran up the pole really quickly.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to reach us, you could do so by emailing podcast@33sticks.com or on the web at www.33sticks.com. The 33 Tangents podcast is a production of 33 Sticks.